Hello and welcome to Total Health with Dr. Nick, where my purpose is to inspire, empower, and motivate you to live longer, healthier, and more abundant lives. And yes, I'm here to motivate you, so hopefully you are ready. Well, today I want to talk to you about the dangers and why visceral fat is so deadly. That's right, that belly fat that you've got around here that you think is so cute, why it's absolutely deadly and you have to get rid of it. And we're going to show you at the end of this video on how to do that. So you want to make sure you watch till the very end. Well, guys, if you don't know if you have visceral fat or not, a couple of questions you should ask yourself. Number one, do you suffer from Dunlop disease? Now, if you're from the South, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Dunlop disease is when your belly Dunlops over your belt, okay? So Dunlop disease is definitely a sign of visceral fat. Or if you're the type that says, check it out, this is like a rock here, you can punch on it and there's, you can't feel fat, you can't squeeze fat, just try to, pinch some fat over here. And you have a big gut, that's the problem. You're not feeling the subcutaneous fat. You're feeling the visceral fat underneath, which you cannot pinch. So if you've got a big old gut and yet you can't pinch any of it, you've got visceral fat. And once again, this is deadly. So guys, like I said, watch to the very end because I'm going to give you the 4 tips on how to get rid of it. And I'm going to tell you, it's not the same as subcutaneous fat. They're very different. So if you're thinking, well, when you're waving to your friends and you stop waving yet your arm is still waving, that's subcutaneous fat. If you've got some fat on the back of your thighs, that's subcutaneous fat. Not the same thing. We're talking about visceral fat today. So let's dive on in. What exactly is visceral fat? Well, visceral fat is really the internal fat that's around your organs. So visceral fat is stored in a person's abdominal cavity and is known as active fat, as it influences how the hormones function in the body. And excess of visceral fat, therefore, have potential dangerous side effects. And that's the thing. Visceral fats surround your organs. They have a whole lot more of a hormonal effect on how your body's working. In fact, the higher the amount of visceral fat a person stores, the more they are at risk for certain health complications. Now, what are we talking about here? Very dangerous health complications, namely heart attacks. Heart disease. So if you've got visceral fat, you've got fat surrounding your heart and it's affecting how it functions. But once again, like I said, it affects the hormones. And hormones affect a lot about how your body's working. Insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes. That's right. So if you are overweight, especially around the waist, you are going to be insulin resistant, which is one of the reasons why you're putting on weight around your waist. Blood pressure, you're at increased risk of stroke, colorectal cancer, breast cancer. Once again, lots of hormone issues here, Alzheimer's disease, and hormonal dysregulation. Now, what causes this? Well, it's basically how you're eating, and how you're eating then ends up creating a whole lot of, like I said, hormonal dysregulation. So say, for example, you're from the north like I originally am from New York, and you love a good bagel. Well, the problem with a bagel is you have a lot of high starch, a lot of high carbs, and you have fat mixed with that. So you take in that bagel, it increases your blood sugar, which is going to increase your insulin, which is then going to cause you to store it around your midsection. The interesting thing about how grains work especially, and this is not the same so much with sugars, meaning your simple sugars, but your complex carbs, your grains, your cereal, your rice, your pasta, things like that store more around the waist. So know that. Your grains, your wheat, that's why it's called wheat belly. You get a wheat belly there. It's definitely coming more from your grains where you store it around here. Now the problem with that is this. Once you start storing more around your abdominal cavity, it has an estrogenic effect. That's right, guys. You don't want that. You don't want an estrogenic effect because you know what happens. You start to grow boobs, okay? Man boobs, breast tissue. You can actually grow that because you become an estrogen factory here. And ladies, you don't want that either because although your body needs estrogen, you don't need excess amounts of estrogen and you don't need the wrong kinds of estrogen. So it increases inflammation in the body, and it also causes, like I said, hormone disruption or hormone dysregulation. Now, you can see it here. This is the visceral fat right here. The visceral fat starts once again to grow around the organs. This that you see around here, around the arms and the torso, that's that subcutaneous fat. The visceral fat is right here. Now, once again, how do you measure for visceral fat? Or how do you know if you really have visceral fat? Well, I gave you some indicators already, but this is really simple in a nutshell. Are you shaped like an apple or are you shaped like a pear? Very simple. If you're shaped like an apple, you have more visceral fat. Why? Because your fat is above your waistline. So if it's above the waist and you're more of an apple shape, you have visceral fat. If you are shaped more like a pear, okay, where you tend to be narrow here and then get wider in the butt and hips area, that means you have more subcutaneous fat. So if the fat is below the waist, it's subcutaneous fat. If it's above the waist, once again, you measure above your umbilicus there, your belly button, you've got a big old stomach starting up here, you have visceral fat. Now, other ways to measure it. You can use MRIs, or you can use computerized tomography. When you use these type of scans, you want to be anywhere in the range of about 1 to 59. Okay, so 1 to 59 if you're using a fat analyzer from a body scan. Anything above 13 means that you are at increased risk of having visceral fat, and you need to change your diet and your lifestyle immediately, okay? Now, Harvard School of Medicine said this: you could also determine how much visceral fat you have because it's about 10% of your overall body fat. So if you know your overall body fat, figure at about 10% of it is gonna be visceral fat. Now, another thing you can do too, really simple, if you don't have, of course, a fat scale analyzer, or you don't have an MRI sitting around like so many of us don't, just look at your waistline. Once again, like I said, you're going to be shaped more like an apple rather than a pear, but these are the numbers you're going to want to look at. So if you're a lady, ladies, you want to measure right around your umbilicus, right around your belly button, and if you're over 35 inches, you have visceral fat and you are at increased rate of death or disease of all the problems I talked about earlier. I'm sorry that I'm getting a little bit hardcore here, but it's the truth and I care about you. I don't want you to, leave this world too early. If you're a guy, you can't be above 40 inches. Now, I would bring those numbers even down a little bit more, but guys, measure your umbilicus, not once again down here, right where your belt line is, because where your belt line is, a lot of times is all sucked in because you have Dunlop disease. But if you measure around your umbilicus, that's where your true measurement is, and you want to be under 40, okay? So now, the question is, like I said, watch to the very end because I want to tell you exactly how to get rid of this. There are 4 ways that you can get rid of this, and they're actually very easy to do. Now, number 1, you want to make sure you get adequate sleep. Now, what I mean by adequate sleep is you want to be no less than 5 hours, but really no more than 8. I know some people think they need more sleep than that, but studies show if you don't get enough sleep, you run a much higher risk of developing dangerous visceral fat. Probably one of the reasons is because you cannot reduce your cortisol levels. You have to reduce your cortisol levels, which rolls us into number 2 here, reduce stress. If you don't reduce your stress, your cortisol levels are too high. When your cortisol levels are too high, that's a hormone that will store belly fat, okay? So if you notice that, ever since you've been stressed out about your job or a career change or whatever it may be, now all of a sudden you're putting on more belly fat, it's because your cortisol levels have probably gone up. Now, they're typically higher in the morning anyway, and they taper off as the day goes on, but if you have high cortisol levels all day long, you're gonna be storing belly fat. Another thing to do too is diet. Obviously, we're going to talk about the ketogenic diet. I believe it's probably the finest diet there is, but here's the problem. You have to be careful, and you've heard me say this on some of my previous videos. Just because you're going keto doesn't mean you eat copious amounts of fat. You can't eat fat for days. You have to be careful, because if you're taking in too much fat, your body's going to be burning dietary fat, storing what it doesn't use, and never getting to the stored fat. So you have to start to regulate up and down, and maybe this is why some of you hit a plateau where you're not losing any more weight. And if this is you, I hope this gives you some good advice. You want to lower your fat levels. Lower them down a bit so that way your body goes to stored fat rather than the dietary fat you're taking in. So once again, keto diet is good because it reduces the inflammation, but also too, it reduces those insulin spikes. We talk about all those insulin spikes. Every time you eat a food that spikes your insulin, your body goes into storage mode. Think of it this way: insulin insulates, okay? That's a great way for you guys to think about it. Insulin insulates. So if you're taking in foods that's spiking your insulin, you're going to be insulating. Just know that. Now, the other thing too is HIIT training, high intensity interval training. Now, weight training is going to help overall, but HIIT training is even better. Why? Because it's so highly intense in a short and compressed period of time. Go back and watch one of my previous videos where I talk about HIIT training and how to do it properly. With HIIT training, the benefits are numerous, but one of the biggest ones is because you compress your time of training, you don't get to the beyond 40 minutes of a workout. I had a lady ask me today, why do I recommend HIIT training? her workouts are about an hour and a half long. I said, whoa, that's way too long. Anything over 40 minutes, you actually secrete cortisol. Your cortisol levels are going to go up. So by keeping your training more intense in a shorter period of time, I call it higher intensity, short duration training, you're going to reduce your cortisol levels and you are going to burn more visceral fat, okay? So guys, I hope this was great information for you. I hope you learned a lot. And I hope you take this seriously and get rid of that belly fat. Get rid of the visceral fat that you have stored inside. So remember, if you got Dunlop disease or you're one of those big good old boys with a big gut and it's hard as a rock, that's visceral fat. You've got it underneath. So like I said, I hope this is great information for you. If so, you know what to do. Please make sure you like, you share, you comment, and subscribe. And thanks again so much for helping our channel grow as quickly as it is. I love and appreciate you guys. You take care. I'll see you next time. This is Dr. Nick. Bye-bye.